All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining in from. And welcome to another edition of Open Source Friday. I'm Karan and I lead international developer relations at GitHub. And Open Source Friday are, streams for all of you to connect with various different maintainers and also projects from the open source ecosystem, hear from them, and also discover what's happening. So today we have, Peter Thomas, who is the CTO of Karate Labs and the Karate as a framework. So before we bring on Peter, I have a small video, an explainer of what exactly is the Karate framework, which I'd like to show it to you all, and then we'll bring on Peter for a little more conversation about the open source journey and about Karate itself.
Let's meet JDo, a market-leading platform in its segment. JDo releases multiple updates to their platform every month, adding new functionality and features that their customers love. The number of bugs in each release remains negligible, and the team feels confident that there are enough tests even for the newly released features. But it was not always like this. Just a few months ago, JDo could barely push a single release every month, and even that release was full of bugs, causing huge customer churn. The testing team were struggling with having to use multiple automation tools and writing tests that were hard to maintain and took too much time to code. It was then that a new developer introduced the team to Karate. Karate is an open source solution that unifies API and UI test automation. Karate has its own domain-specific language, which is better suited to writing tests, with 60% less code and in 1/4 the time. Karate also has powerful assertions, runs tests in parallel, and can reuse API tests as performance tests. JDo soon adopted Karate for test automation, and now they have a successful product, satisfied customers, and a happy team. Like JDo, teams all across the world have experienced these benefits, and hence, today, Karate has ever-increasing GitHub stars and is used by a large part of the Global 2000. Whether you are a startup, a small team, or a large enterprise, you too can join the test automation revolution at github.com/Karate Labs.
So that was a brief of what Karate as a framework does and what Karate Labs does. So let's chat more about what Karate is and the open source journey behind the creator of the framework, Peter Thomas. Hi, Peter. How are you doing today?
Hey Karan, I'm good. How about you?
Doing well, thanks. And thanks so much for joining us on the Open Source Friday live stream. I'm sure, by now all of the viewers have a fair sense of what is karate and what it does as well, right? So we'll dive a little bit more into that in a bit more about karate itself. But can you share a little bit about yourself? What do you do, and generally as Peter?
Oh, okay, Karan. Yeah, thanks. So I have been in the industry as a software developer for 25 plus years. So that's a pretty long time. I've worked in a few big companies. My last two corporate stints were at Yahoo and then Intuit. And it was at Intuit. I spent 9 years from 2012 onwards. That was where Karate was created. So I can talk more about that. But yeah, pretty much a Bangalore techie, Karan. Very passionate about coding, still codes. Owes a lot to open source, has always been passionate about open source for some reason. I do music on the side in case that's of interest, but that's all the side stuff. But I hardly have time for it, actually. It's mostly about the code, keeping up to date, and worrying about the future a little bit. But yeah.
Nice. That's great to know. So Going back a little bit, right? So how did you just initially get involved in open source itself? What was your first touch point, or what was your first contribution or first project that you really started working on?
Yeah, sure. So when I started working, right, I was just out of college and so on, and this is way back. In fact, GitHub did not exist. It was a world in which SourceForge was like the go-to place for open source. So that was where I actually uh, started. I attempted. I actually created one small open source project. It's still there on SourceForge. It's called CB2XML, and this was 2004. Okay, so it's been ages. Interestingly, I actually looked it up today because I knew this conversation was going to happen, and it's still active. The maintainer who's now running the project still making releases. So it's kind of a very satisfying feeling, and so on. So that was that. It turned out to be quite good. I could see a use for it even within my team in those days. But I then did, over the next few years, multiple attempts to create an open source project, and most of them were not successful. Okay, so one did click. That was in 2006. Something called JTrack, which you can think of as a competitor to Jira, right? And I know a lot of developers have opinions on Jira, so it might be of interest for you to hear that. Yeah, I tried to create a competitor to Jira long back. It did well. It actually got translated into 20 different languages by volunteers from all over the world. So that was reasonably successful. And then, I think I got very much I was, like all the other Bangalore techies, working hard on, my day job, the sprints and so on. And then into it, uh, fast forward to 2016 was when Karate was created. I'd be happy to talk more about that, but short answer to your question is, yeah, I have always been trying. I started at SourceForge, had some success, but kind of fizzled out. And I hope that's actually a sign of hope for folks listening. I know a lot of you are aspiring to do open source, so at least in my case, you have to try and try again. It doesn't happen instantly. Uh, you need to have patience, and good things would happen eventually.
So 21 years ago, Peter, 2004, when you started, right? Did you go on with the thought that, okay, I want to create something and put it out over there, or were you trying to solve one of a problem and then say, okay, I'm going to share it with my, peers as well right now? Or did someone motivate you saying that, hey, why don't you try this out? So what was the initial motivation, or your intention behind starting on this journey?
Yeah, it's a combination. One certainly was, Karan, to solve a particular problem. That's how at least the most successful open source projects I've created have worked out. I guess that's another good takeaway, which is, yeah, if you create something that is solving a pain point that you have, and maybe your immediate team has, uh, at least that's how my first open source project, and of course the most recent one, have worked out, which is Karate. So that's one. And yes, I will not deny that for all programmers there's this tendency. Yeah, you want to put your work out there, you want to get compliments for your source code and so on. So yes, I am just like anybody else in that regard. That helps. I had seen, of course, in those days, the whole open source movement was just getting strong. There was certainly a lot of awareness of Linux, for example, in those days. And I was using a few projects from SourceForge. So yes, there was this there was this nice feeling. Hey, I'm also part of this club, and of course all the things that go along with open source, where you contribute, you're making a difference in this community, and so on. So it's a combination of factors, Karan. But I would say having to solve a problem for yourself is important. I think that is the key to maybe a relatively successful open source project.
Okay, that's great. I think one of the things for all of you who are viewing, right? every time when I speak to any of the open source maintainer, I think the common theme that they always keep talking about is that they got started with open source because of the problem that they wanted to solve, and then saw open source as a way to not just solve that problem but also share it, with others to help that grow. Like how Peter was also mentioning, one of the early projects that he started, even though I'm guessing, Peter, you're not maintaining it currently, is something which is kind of continuing to live with the maintainership of others, right? So something that's very interesting in many of my conversations with open source maintainers. So speaking of a bit about karate, Peter, is that we saw in the video as well that it's an entire testing automation framework, right? Which you mentioned you started around 2016 or so, 9 years ago, right? So what was the unique pain point that you were trying to solve at that time with karate, which you thought that it was a gap, or it's a problem that could be solved better?
Yeah, sure. So yes, 2016, and I remember it quite well. So this was when I had completed 6 years at Intuit, and my role was platform architect. I was responsible for a team that had to ship a whole bunch of microservices, REST APIs, that were pretty important for the business. They were the foundation for all kinds of end user experiences and so on. And one day the team came to me saying, they're having this trouble with a particular test suite. Um, and that was actually the first time when I actually went and took a deep look at what the team was using. And uh, what I saw I did not actually like it at all. Of course, like most techies, I'm very opinionated, and that leads to open source, I guess. But to me, I think one of the fundamental problems that I did not like about what I was seeing, Karan, was the fact that uh, if you read the test code, you simply couldn't figure out what it actually was doing from a business point of view. There's a lot of code, and to make matters worse, I think it was a somewhat over-engineered framework, and I could tell that this particular framework that I was looking at had been created by maybe generations of previous teams who had tried and made some changes, but at the end, if you wanted to understand what one test was doing, you actually had to go to multiple different you know, code fragments all over the place, different artifacts. So I didn't like that at all. To me, being opinionated and so on, I feel when you look at a test, you should be actually able to understand and almost read it. Ideally, you should read it like plain English. Of course, that's a stretch with code, but you try to get as close as possible to that. And also importantly, Karan, I feel you should just look at one, you should just be able to read something top to bottom and understand, okay, this is a story, this is the test, this is what we are trying to achieve from an end user testing point of view. So with all that, I decided to create some framework, and that's where karate started. 2016 December, I still remember. I actually was working on it through Christmas and New Year, and my family was not very happy with that. And so come 2017, early 2017, I go to my team and said, hey, yeah, this is the testing framework. It's very good at testing APIs. It solves the problems that I wanted to solve, which is make it easy to write tests, make them readable. And to get into a very technical aspect, I think which makes karate really work well is you express the data for your APIs in JSON itself. You do not like many other frameworks make you do not write code like Java pojos or .NET classes, C# classes. You write just JSON, and JSON is what gets sent over the wire to the server. So in a way, it actually saves you a lot of trouble. It's very elegant, neat, and all that. Interestingly, not many teams adopted it in Intuit, and again, no surprises. I think Karan, how teams struggle with the day, jobs, and they have their sprint troubles and all that. So this random guy coming and saying that he's created a framework didn't really fly very well. Fortunately, and I really owe thanks to Intuit for that, which is they really encourage employees to contribute to open source, and I said, wow, okay, I would like to open source this. I got a lot of support from Intuit, so thanks again to Intuit. And with Intuit's blessing and permission, I open source Karate. So this happened in February 2017, where Karate, the first version, goes out on GitHub. And interestingly, it started getting adopted pretty fast. I would say it certainly hit what seemed to be a gap in the whole industry. And there were folks from I would like to thank Joe Colantonio, for example. He's a leading evangelist and influencer in the world of test automation. So he had this YouTube video and blog and examples of Karate, and that really kick-started the adoption of Karate to the extent, Karan, which totally blew me away when it happened, was I think just 6 months after Karate was released, the first version ever released, there was actually a job listing for Karate in somewhere in Canada. I'll never forget that. Wow. But that to me is like a record. It showed, that it actually got adopted by some teams, and some teams really started, being very good proponents of it. And that's where it all started, Karan. It was a distinct pain point that I felt in my team. And of course, very quickly over the year or two after Karate was released, my team at Intuit, most of the teams in Intuit started adopting it. So it just took off from there.
Nice. So when you were there back at Intuit as well, and you had built Karate, at what point did you actually decide, or what was the motivation behind saying that, okay, I'm gonna make it open source, versus saying that, okay, I'm gonna build it out a bit more, I'm going to probably make this into a product, turn it into a business first. So from what I understood, you made it open source first and then looking at how to monetize. So what was the motivation behind going down that route?
Oh yeah, that's a big one. So just to make sure, right, you're currently asking about, it started as open source. And first I'll acknowledge and I'll tell you the reality of what happened, which is, yes, when I created Karate and just shipped that first version, there were absolutely no expectation. It was just, okay, I created something on the side. In fact, the conversation at my company was, hey, nobody seems to want this in Intuit. You mind if I open source this? And by all means. And everybody agrees, that what's the worst thing that can happen? Nobody adopts it. I've just maybe wasted a few hours of my time, and then everybody moves on, right? That's what, to be honest, most people expect it to happen, maybe including myself. Okay. Anyway, but it took off, and now what's happening is I find myself sucked in the wonderful world of open source. I actually missed it. Again, there was this period of my life where I wasn't doing any open source at all. There was some of my work, for example, one particular workplace wasn't really appreciative or encouraging about open source. In fact, you have some it's like when you're doing an open source, some people consider it a distraction, that you're actually not contributing and all that. So I had to go through some of that in long back. But things were much better at Intuit. And so imagine me, right? I'm now maintaining this project. I'm living the good life, from at least an open source point of view, what people see, which is you're getting these pull requests, you're getting feedback, you're getting comments from people using it, you're getting blogs and people posting about it. So that to someone like me is tremendously motivating, and that led me to actually put a lot more energy into Karate. So Karate actually became this very interesting combination. It started out with just API testing, then API mocking, then performance testing, which is great. In fact, it's still the only open source project where you can reuse a functional test as a performance test, which is pretty cool. And even UI automation got added, towards the later stages. So, but I'm still, at Intuit, kind of doing two things. At nighttime, I'm doing all this open source hacking and, merging PRs and contributing and so on, while I'm this architect and having to do all the day job stuff. And to be honest, that started becoming hard to manage, Karan. So fast forward to 2021, which is when I think that's your question, right? How did this now suddenly start transitioning to commercial Karate labs and so on? And interestingly, So one thing that was happening was there's certainly a friction, right? My leadership expects me to be like fully committed to my day job, whereas open source is pulling me in a different direction. And um, I'm pretty open to saying this. It was clear which one I prefer to work on. Open source is much more fun, Karan, and I'm sure you get that. So um, that was happening, and it was at that time, Karan, and I think this is when we first connected, which was the GitHub grant from India. This was 2021. I think
Yeah.
August, September was the whole process, and I actually won one of the slots. So I actually got selected, became a finalist, and wow, I got the GitHub grant, and that was a super cool moment for obvious reasons. But it also put that thought into my mind, which is, well, yeah, open source can be monetized, in some ways. I mean, and I looked at it as kind of a signal. Hey, okay, maybe the universe is telling you, Peter, that there are bigger things you should do with karate. And it was around this time, Karan, and thanks to GitHub and you and your team, honestly, because that, uh, you know, I was already thinking about, yeah, should I? And I took the plunge and I said, okay, I want to now do karate full time, and that's how it all started. Okay, and uh, yeah, and to add, I also, when this whole thought process happened after the GitHub grant, I applied to Y Combinator. And I can go into details, and I think you're well aware, Karan. Yeah, open source is a very uncertain world, because one day you are getting this very steady, decent job, paycheck, and all that, and then now it's uncertain. You're now a startup founder. What's for the future? Can you still get the income and all that? So with that in mind, and the other thing that I was very clear about, Karan, is that, and again, hopefully advice to some folks who are watching, which is, I know my limitations. I am a developer. I'm not probably the guy you would call to what do you say, run finance or operations and stuff. I just like being the code, and that's where I'm happiest. I don't really like the people management aspect and all that. Individual contributor. So I have an old friend, we go long back, and I said, hey, we want to start this company together. And, he took some time to kind of look at karate and said, okay, I'm in. And both of us said, okay, we're going to be committed to open source, but we did decide to apply to Y Combinator. Fortunately, we got in on the first attempt. So that kind of gave us at least that, what do you say, the whole foundation. And, it took away some of the worries of the future and all that. And we started Karate Labs in end 2021. The same year I got the GitHub grant, Karan. So yeah, that's that. And of course, things are very interesting now. 5 years from that point, 4 years, and yeah, lots to talk about there. But I hope I answered your question as to what my
Yeah.
thought process was.
Absolutely,
How it
absolutely, Peter.
played out.
And one of the things I again want to share with all of them watching this is it's also a kind of a theme that I've noticed with many successful open source projects and maintainers as well, where many of the people who are leading the open source project just put it out over there that hey, it's I'm passionate about this, let's put it out over there, and then suddenly found interest from other teams or developers and organizations, and before they knew it there was some support coming in and things like that as well, right? So I think it's a combination of the problem that you're trying to solve, and also taking the plunge and putting out in the open, and then having the community kind of guide you and help you as well. So that's great to hear about it, Peter, that there were a lot of signals that you were getting around the interest around karate and around the monetization aspect, which is when you thought that, okay, let's make this into kind of like a business itself. You had people within the automation space helping you as well, etc., right? So a little bit around that also is, it's not kind of like easy for many people to say that, okay, I'm gonna now leave my day job and then start working on this full time, right? So what were some of the challenges that you faced, or thoughts around sustainability which came in to your mind as well as to, okay, now I'm working on this full time. How do I keep this running, and how do you keep, kind of like yourselves running as well?
Oh man, yes. There's so much to unpack here, Karan, and yeah, it's not easy. As I said, it's it's a very uncertain thing to do. You do not know. Yeah, sustainability. That's a big word, isn't it? For open source. So
Yeah.
to make matters more interesting, one of the things Kapil, who's my co-founder, and myself, we agreed on in the very first month itself was we did not want to do a bait and switch in open source. So we actually gave a commitment. We put it up on all our channels, LinkedIn, especially, which is nothing in karate would be retroactively license changed or made commercial. You know what I mean, right? And we've seen so many cases of companies getting it wrong. They kind of go stray from the whole principles of open source, and in reality what happens is I think they pretty much badly upset the community and developers. And me being a developer, I understand. I keep saying developers are very opinionated, and if you lose a developer's trust, it's a very hard thing to win back. So now we said we are not going to start charging money for anything which is karate. It remains MIT license. We are not changing the license. So that's kind of a little brave, but it obviously puts us into speaking of challenges now. What do we do? How do we monetize? So we did go through some iterations and figuring this out. But to cut the long story short, Karan, one of the primary things we are doing as an open source company, Karate Labs, is we are we we talked to users. In fact, let me start with that. I think that's important. And by the way, that is actually one of the benefits of Y Combinator. I think this is a very well-known thing. It's one of their very core principles that they keep telling founders: talk to users. Okay, so so two things here, for those who are maybe aspiring founders. One, the answer: did karate being open source help in getting into YC? Very much. It was a big factor, especially at that point. The traction, the GitHub stars that it had at that point were very good indicators, and I think personally that actually led to us being accepted to Y Combinator. That's one. And the other thing I wanted to just mention again, benefits of open source wise, is that as Karate Labs just starting out, we had this wonderful situation where we had a whole, we had users all across the globe. Okay. And I'll explain what I mean by that, which is when you do open source, and of course people use your product, your project, and pull requests come in, and people blog about it and make YouTube videos about it. You pretty much come to know, which companies are using it, which big enterprises possibly are using it. And this happened in Karate's case. For example, I can throw names like, and this is all public domain because all these companies have blogged about Karate: Walmart, Adobe, WorldPay, and Expedia, and so on. So um, the good thing we had as a new company startup current was we had plenty of users to talk to. So we did that. In fact, I think I spent the first one and a half years along with couple diligently having these calls with users and asking them, what would you want to see in karate, what's working, what's not. And I think that is the key to any what do you say startup success, to be honest. What it led us to was, okay, improve the developer experience. I know it's kind of a cliche now, developer experience, but we narrowed down on, we are going to make IDE plugins for both IntelliJ. We started with IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code that are Karate Labs plugins for working with Karate open source. I think that's working really well. In fact, fast forward to today, it's pretty clear. We don't really worry about paychecks. Things are good, enterprise customers, and so on. That's just one of the things we have. So yeah, talking to users and having a plugin that is not open source but complements neatly the open source layer that we have. And of course we have a few other components. I think we hit upon a pretty good balance of maybe open core, as some people like to call it. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how we navigated that pretty challenging initial time full of uncertainty. And I think we've come a long way from that.
That's that's great to hear, Peter. And I think one of the useful things, of course, that you mentioned is that really kind of gathering all of the feedback that you have and also inputs from from all of your users as well who are interested in giving feedback as well, etc. In the end, you mentioned a bit about open core, right? And I want to just double click a bit on that because one of the things that many of the people who either start off open source or already have an open source project is thinking about what are the business models, how do I actually even monetize this? And so there is Karate Labs and there is Karate as an open source project, right? So how do you differentiate between both of them, and how exactly, if you can share, is a high level business model of your how you're monetizing karate itself?
Yeah, yes, that's a lot. So number one, I think to repeat something I said earlier, our commitment to open source remains. We actually see that as where everything starts. And let me put it this way: we have around 340,000 active monthly users of the Karate open source, which is a lot, and
Oh.
most of them do not pay us. And we are fine with that. So I think that everything starts there. And what happens is, uh, because of that, karate is used in many organizations, right? For those of you who may be new to the industry, think of, karate plays a very important role at being like a gatekeeper before big enterprise teams release software to production, especially APIs. And I think all of you know that APIs are a big deal nowadays, especially so with AI and all that. Okay, so karate is something that gives big companies the confidence to release their APIs whenever they make changes to their software. Okay, so what happens typically, Karan, to tell you maybe the process of how we get into an enterprise. Typically one or two developers who are very passionate, who really want to improve the state of things in their team, their sprint, and all that. They evaluate karate, and here again, being open source is a huge advantage, right? We are very developer friendly. People can just go and download from GitHub, maybe use it via Maven. uh, they don't need to pay us anything. All the documentation, in fact we have very good documentation, and that's certainly something that's helped in being successful with karate. um, and what happens is that karate very seamlessly embeds itself into a team. So what happens is they end up using karate, and it's now a very integral part of the whole CI/CD build and release and all that. And once that happens, it tends to move across teams. I've seen that happen in many enterprise teams. And that's the point where maybe someone reaches out with a question, maybe on our support, and then we engage. In fact, we have many cases where these teams from these big organizations actually reach out. Some examples are they reach out, say, hey, we want to talk on karate, or we want a little bit of a demo, we want to know about your enterprise features because we started hearing about them. So I think the moral of the story here is open source is a great, what do you say, channel for you to get enterprise sales if you play it right. And I think we are kind of proud of the fact that we stuck to being open source. All the, as I said, it's easy to download. There are no limits. Again, something that I'm very fascinated by. A lot of maybe tooling in our the same part, I mean the department, or the same competitors, right? For example, some of them have limits on the number of API calls you can make, which I find really hard to digest. So we don't have any of that. And the good news is that we are happy. In fact, if out of the large number of people actually using karate, a fraction of them, in fact, our goal, Karan, is internally we want to hit 1 million active monthly users, and we just want to monetize 3%. That's absolutely fine for us. That is more than sufficient for us to actually keep investing more into karate, innovating and creating more products, of which we have a lot of thoughts. But yeah, hopefully I've hit upon a few you know points there, but feel free to pick apart any that I think you found interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from what I was able to gather, of course, the core part of karate still continues to exist, and you have other kind of offerings on top of it, mainly suited for enterprises or for support or for kind of actually helping implement. Is that understanding right?
That's right. I missed saying support explicitly. Yes, some customers want support. In fact, there's an interesting aspect. We found some enterprises reach out simply because, and this is an open source thing that you might be interested in, Karan, which is some companies, because they use open source, they want this kind of a throat to choke for that open source component. So purely from that perspective, we've signed some deals where they said we just want this a few hours, per year for support, and we are happy to give it to them. So support is that there. We have enterprise features. If I give you a sense, one is the IDs, which I talked about. That's I think the most straightforward separation of open core versus okay, ID is optional. We have other options as IDs and plugins and all that, but our IDE gives you a better experience. That's one. Of late, our async API testing tools, which are completely enterprise, are very popular. I'll give you examples: gRPC and WebSockets and Kafka. In fact, we're seeing this actually take off late. Maybe it's AI, I don't know, but I think async protocols are coming into fashion, maybe, and all that. So that's another enterprise channel for us that is doing quite well. We also have an MCP server that works well with GitHub Copilot, so I have to say that. And Open API and Swagger support and so on. So there's quite a few, and people who are interested are happy. You can find more details obviously on our website. But yes, Karan, support these enterprise layers on top of an open source core support, and the other enterprise things that you can give along with all these things bundled.
That's nice. That's nice. So, kind of not really like crystal ball gazing, but looking forward, what does the roadmap for karate look like? Especially in the age of AI, I would say.
Yeah, that's a $1 million question. I knew AI was going to come up. First of all, by the way, we have technology partnerships with GitHub. In fact, we are proud to say that GitHub and Karate Labs, are technology partners. The same way, there is a company that I'm sure some of you have heard of. It's called Guidewire. They are, one of the most popular insurance platforms for property and casualty. And they long back, even before Karate Labs existed, they chose to use Karate for their internal testing framework. Okay, and to cut a long story short, we are the first and only testing solution partner for Guidewire, and that relationship continues. And we are looking forward to that. Specifically, Karan, to answer your question, one of our future directions is to do something specific for insurance domain. So to step back, Karate is this very domain agnostic testing solution. So it works in any industry, be it finance, healthcare, retail, and so on. Thanks to Guidewire selecting us, and thanks to our work with Guidewire, we have understood that the insurance domain is very hard to test for various reasons, and there needs to be a little more layering on top. So we have been working on that for a year plus now. We are going to release something within a couple of months, so stay tuned for that. The other thing, talking about AI, yes, we were wondering, Karan, to be honest, should we get into the business of testing AI? We're kind of staying away from it right now. There are a lot of players in that space. Plus, I don't think it's really clear yet. Everyone knows the challenges with AI. It's not predictable, which is one of the worst things. In fact, testing AI is such a poles apart from testing APIs. What I personally like about API testing, it's so cut and dried. There's only one way to call an API. If you get one JSON value wrong, it's not going to work. And you know exactly what's going to come back. And if something comes back slightly mistyped, or if some data packet is missing, it's not correct. It's just a failure, right? So one of the nice things about Karate, which I think people really like, is the ability to do assertions, right? Basically validate that every character, every data piece that you expect in the response is there as expected. And as you can imagine, the whole thing is completely inverted with the AI, because what you get back from an LLM is not predictable by design, and it's really hard to test. I personally think it's still early days in how to test LLM, so that's a different story. That said, and I think I mentioned MCP, right? MCP, I know a lot of you have heard of this by now. We feel at Karate Labs that MCP is probably the best place to position Karate Labs for testing either LLMs, because that's a very formal channel. It's a little more standardized as to how you talk to an LLM. And I think the other point we are thinking of is we feel, at least for testing LLMs, we have to use local models. Let me put this another way. You're already spending a lot of token money for using something like the tier one LLMs, and we know which ones are there. If you want to use another LLM to test that, because that is probably a pattern some of you have heard of, using an LLM as a judge for other LLMs, and that's one of the ways in which you can do testing of AI systems. We feel at least you need to use local LLMs, something that's ideally open source and something that you can run locally, where you're not paying, all the time for all the token consumption and all that, and use that as a way to test other LLMs and systems that you build on top of LLMs and all that. Early days, just I've just given you the beginnings of some of the thought process that we have within Karate Labs. But I'll end with this, Karan, and I think this may be interesting. Our thesis at Karate Labs is that we may be going into a world where most or more and more code is going to be written by LLMs. I think there's no escaping that fact. People are using it left and right. People are, asking the LLM questions and then pasting it and, passing it off as production code. Not a big fan of that yet, but, it's evolving. In that case, Karan, what we feel is you can't now have AI generate tests for testing what an AI creates. You have to draw the line somewhere. You have to put humans in charge, humans in the loop. So we feel, Karan, that in a future where a lot more code is going to be created by AI, we still need to give humans the power to test systems. Testing remains or probably becomes more relevant. And we at Karate Labs are committed to, committed to making that as easy as possible, Karan. So hopefully that gives you a sense of, how we are thinking about AI. But yeah, it's there are a lot of very interesting things going to happen in the future. Do we have all the answers? Absolutely not.
That's helpful to know and understand, Peter. So for those of you who are viewing live, if you have any questions for Peter, please do drop them in the chat, and if you do have time, happy to bring those up. So finally, a last thing that Peter, I would like to ask you is, for all of those developers out over there who are either just getting started in open source as a contributor, or toying around with a hobby open source project, or even those people who are really thinking of building an entire business or a startup around open source, what is one, your advice, and two, what are some of the lessons that you would like to share with them, saying that this went well for me, or this did not go for me, so here's something that I want to share with you about?
Yeah, awesome. I'll start by, I start by referencing what I talked about earlier, Karan, which was my initial journey. And, I started in 2004, had a few, hits and misses in terms of open source projects. And then suddenly in 2016, Karate, takes off. It's been certainly the most successful and it's changed my life very clearly. So, and the point is, and you said it yourself, right? You go back so many years, and I think the takeaway for at least what I would like to share is it doesn't happen overnight. I know that's a cliche, but I've certainly lived it. That you need to have patience. And a typical problem with techies, and I identify as one who has this problem, is that you expect instant gratification, right? The techie's brain is wired such as you create some nice code and you put it out there, and you expect immediately the whole world comes to your doorstep and pays you money and tells you good things and all that. And that doesn't happen in open source. Now, admittedly, there could be these exceptions in open source, like a Kubernetes and all that, which have this massive adoption and people probably contributing every minute and so on. But it's very rare. In the case of karate, it took a long time. I still remember, it was crawling to 100 stars and 500 stars and all that, and it's been very steady all the time. And you have to be patient. I guess this is the hard one, right? On one hand, right, I've ended up monetizing karate, but I'm very genuine and very transparent about the fact that when I started karate, there was absolutely no expectation of it turning out to be anything big. And there's a very interesting thing here, which I feel is sometimes you just put your whole heart and soul into something, that actually has this very interesting effect. It works. Okay, it just goes to places you did not expect. And the more you start trying to control things, actually you have the opposite effect. Okay, just saying that it's a very philosophical woohoo kind of thing, but I'll just say it anyway. The point I wanted to make is that you have to wait. There are definite cases in karate where I see playing out, which is, as an example, right, a feature that we released last year, almost a year plus back, around a year back, is only getting adopted now, right? We're having a user finally come up and saying, hey, this is good, we're going to pay for this. So it may be different in some other domains and all that, but most of the time, if you're getting into open source, it's going to be a thankless job most of the time. Okay, I do use that term, thankless job. Yes, you get all these brickbats from people who don't like your project. And that's another piece of advice. You're going to have a lot of naysayers. You're going to have people saying, this sucks. I think this is a far better way to do this. This is over engineering and whatnot. And I personally, as a character, as my personality, I used to really get influenced by this. I also have this bad habit. I used to have this bad habit of being on social media and reacting to everything and getting very possessive about my code, and worrying about this other open source project is doing so well, and this other startup has raised a seed round, and all that. And I think my advice is you have to shut out all that. Just keep your head down. Do not expect great things to happen immediately. Have patience, and then good things would happen. Okay, so take it from me, I think that is what probably gets people out of open source, which is you would do something, you expect a lot of great things to happen because you've heard so many success stories, contributors, people contributing and all that. It's very rare that it really happens in a tremendous way. In the case of karate, it has been a very slow grind, and sometimes you go for weeks without hearing anything positive about your project, and you just still need to keep going. Yeah.
That's helpful, Peter. And I think this is probably I'm interpreting this as a question that is coming in from one of the viewers, is around best practice examples. I am guessing this is a question related to hearing from the creator of a test framework on testing best practice examples, is what I'm interpreting this as. If it's something else, please let us know. But any thoughts, or if there were like just 2 or 3 high level bullet points that you would like to share, Peter?
Yeah, documentation is important. I know it has been probably the bane of developers for years, forever, that developers traditionally don't like writing documentation. They're great at coding, they just want to ship code, and then the time it comes to maintain and write documentation, the energy kind of goes down. So and I invite you to look at Karate's documentation. They actually got a very long readme that's also controversial in some ways, but that's another story. But documentation helps. It gives people, I think, a great first impression when they land, saying, okay, this is well documented, there must be something good here, and there's a comfort feeling that this is something we can trust and use easily. So I would strongly say you should do good documentation. And yes, I see a comment saying that Copilot loves documentation, and how lucky is this generation currently that's just getting into things, right? Because yes, it surprises me now that the LLMs are pretty good at writing documentation, so there's no excuse anymore. And maybe you are in a much better position now with all these wonderful tools like Copilot and all that. That's one. And I think responding to questions, you don't need to respond immediately, but I think having empathy with your users is of course a good thing to have for any developer. So I would advise all developers to kind of practice that, just try to put yourselves in the shoes of whoever is asking the question. You might be having a bad day, but someone might be having a worse day asking a question because their job or their sprint deliverable depends on something, and they're stuck and they want help. So I found that I think over the years, I think I've built up some good karma by responding in a reasonably timely way to questions on Stack Overflow, the Git, the releases, and answering questions and giving fixes when people want it. So try to do that, and and finally, don't expect anything. I wanted to say that maybe this is part of the advice that I kind of wanted to share. It's a continuation of the advice for all of you aspiring to do impactful work in open source, which is hopefully this helps. And this is something that I kind of like talking about, which is most of you maybe are working a day job, and if you're like me, you probably do not agree with a lot of the technical decisions that are being made. Yes, and all of us work in these large companies. You are part of a team. Maybe you have inherited some code that's really bad, or maybe you don't agree with your architect on your project. Yes, it's happened to me a few times. No secrets there. I found open source to be this great venting mechanism, where now finally you are the product owner, you are the designer, you are the architect. It's all you are the graphic designer actually in some cases, and you can do things on your own terms. And it's I've actually successfully used open source as a way, okay, now I am controlling this project. It is clean code, it is code that I'm proud of. I've used all the theory that I really wanted to apply, but I never got time to do in my day job because my day job has this terrible time pressure and deadline, stuff that's happening, horror stories. But open source is this wonderful place where you can be yourself, do things the way you want to, whether people like it or not, and see whether it actually works. And you learn a lot in that process, obviously. So I just wanted to pass that on. I think it's a very interesting way of looking at open source, which I haven't heard articulated that much before, where you can do things exactly the way you want to, and almost like prove a point to the people that you don't agree with in a different universe and so on. So hopefully that helps.
Definitely. There is one other question that's come up, Peter, as to, what's the main thing that has changed for the development of Karate's code after forming Karate Labs? Is there a different approach that you took to, the roadmap of Karate itself, or how you build it after you kind of built an entity?
Yeah, and I fully expect this to not be what everyone would like to hear, right? And I think we started out by talking, Karan, about the challenges. It's a hard life being an open source maintainer. Number one, it's even harder if you're an open source maintainer who's trying to run a business around Karate as a software project. Okay, it's very hard. So to answer, and Benjamin Bischoff, yes, thanks for joining. The answer is, we certainly, before we make any changes to Karate, we do have to weigh that now with the lens of saying, hey, should this be open core, or should this be something that we actually put into our enterprise tier and monetize, right? And I think we've successfully drawn that balance, right? Maybe and most of the time our users have appreciated and actually encouraged us with this journey, and it's a very fine line and very tough some line to draw sometimes. So that is the short answer. Of course, the other things is, of course, I've had to change my style of working a little bit, because I used to be this hotshot angry developer sometimes, and I used to get into fights on social media. A lot of that has toned down. That is the other thing. But I think the main answer to your question is yes, we do need to carefully weigh whether we give more things away for free or start monetizing, again, within reasonable limits, if I would use that word.
Got it. I think that's about it, Peter. Any final closing thoughts that you would like to share with all of the developers tuning in, or for those who are watching this later on as a recording?
I think I've said most of what I wanted to say. Have patience. It is an exciting time to be a developer, because with um, all the AI goodness that's coming our way, right? There's no excuse for not dropping something onto GitHub. You can just, quote unquote, wipe code, a whole bunch of code, and put it out on GitHub. And maybe you learn something in that process. Of course, do take care that you're not leaking any secrets, which is a very common mistake people make when they are wipe coding things. But I think we are living in a great time where there's almost no barrier to you writing some good code and putting it out there for the benefit of the world and the community. So I think you should try that and use GitHub, and good things would happen, like in my case. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us on the Open Source Friday live stream, and then sharing a whole lot of things we covered. Your personal journey into open source, the motivation and the intention and the pain points behind karate itself as a project, and how you went about kind of building a startup and a business around it, how you work with all of your developers and everyone who is kind of building in the open source or are looking to get into it, and also a whole lot of your insights to many people as well, like how one of the viewers rightly are saying, the mentorship style talk. Thank you for all of those insights as well. It was great having you once again, and for all of you who are tuning in as well, you can go check out karate on github.com /karate labs /karate for the project itself to know more about. So thank you so much once again, Peter.
Thank you, Karan.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining in. That was Peter Thomas from Karate Labs, walking us through so many different insights on open source itself, and also a whole lot of tips, lessons, challenges, advice, and also examples and practices, etc. So do stay tuned to a whole lot of the Open Source Friday streams that we bring to you every Friday, and most of the Fridays across various different time zones as well, bringing together open source projects and maintainers for a discussion like this, where we get to learn about what's happening in the ecosystem, learn from the projects and the maintainers as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and for more such things, especially with open source ecosystem in India, stay tuned to our X account on x.com/GitHubIndia, or the X account on GitHub, or any of the social accounts on YouTube, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and other channels as well. So thanks again for tuning in, and hope to see you all again in one of the next and upcoming Open Source Friday streams as well. See you, everyone.